kill you.
Hello and welcome back to Zaku Talk. This season, G versus Wing. Welcome to the show where two old nerds argue about which mediocre show is better. I am your host, Patrick Skeyhill, and with me this season is the fantastic...
Bob Skerry, voiceover artist. Do you want me to do more shtick than that? Because I didn't want to step on your stuff. But yes, I'm a voiceover artist here for hire, but also here to nerd out about what I believe is a great anime series, whether or not it counts as being a Gundam. And I have something to say about that when we get to a later part of our broadcast.
Well, that will be sort of interesting to go in there. Okay, so this week we're doing episode 4 of each of these respective shows. But before we get into that, Bob, what have you been up to this week?
This week, I have been actually on a number of various role-playing game streams on Twitch, where I happen to be featured on a few different channels, as well as my own channel, where I've been doing a lot more artistic content. I've been getting into painting Gundam models, and I may have gone off the deep end. I have so much paint and so many brushes, and I'm just, as being someone who suspects they have some variation on ADHD, you find something, you fall in love with it, you consume too much of it, then you throw it in the corner and pick up a different shiny object. So,
well, that sounds both exciting and bleak. Not too much going on my end. Finishing up one movie, prepping another movie, sort of. Internal existential crisis about my relation to narrative overall. So we'll see how that's sort of going.
Also,
yes.
Very uplifting, but bleak.
But don't worry, we have some easy narratives to dissect here that pretty much give you exactly what you're looking for, and maybe just a dash extra. All right, Bob, will you give us a summary of episode 4 of G Gundam?
Challenge, the Red Rose Knight. Also stated in Japanese, Iza Shobu, Shinku no Bara no Kikoshi. In his eagerness, Domon interrupts a fight between Neo-France's representative, George Descend, and another opponent. But George, disgusted at this cavalier attitude, refuses to accept the challenge. Desperate to meet George again in battle, Domon accepts the plan of the Princess of Neo-France, Marie-Louise, to fake her kidnapping and have George come to save her with his Gundam Rose. George obliges, but during the fight, he willingly lets himself open to attack as he prevents the Eiffel Tower from falling on Rain and Marie-Louise, and Domon refuses to take off his Gundam's head. After the match, revealing that the kidnapping was a setup, George declares to not know the man in the photo, and Domon and Rain leave for Neo-Russia.
So that is interesting. That last bit there about the photo, because I don't remember him asking about the photo at all. Did it happen in the show?
I think it was sort of ran over because I don't remember him doing it there. The only time I saw the photo come up was when they're in the hangar dock that we'll talk about in a bit. But
because I made a note specifically like, what, he came all this way here, didn't even ask him about the photo. What was he just wanted to pop out of the water and fight him? It's in this Wikipedia summary that you found. That's so bizarre. Did I just miss that? I could understand you missing it
because I'm watching.
Yeah, but I could understand you missing it because you've seen the show so much you just might sort of gloss over it. But I was waiting all episode for them to do it because I wanted to see how ridiculous it got. It didn't happen, and I was just like, what? But did I check out for 5 seconds somewhere and didn't notice it? I don't know.
I mean, that's very possible because when I was paying attention to the ending there, it was more about Domon trying to figure out how he realized George realized that he didn't actually kidnap Marie-Louise.
Yeah, that was my takeaway too.
There was a fun little bit with that. But.
Yeah, that was my takeaway too. And then they're arguing about like, you write poorly in French, and I go, well, everything's been in English, and I presume in your version everything was in Japanese, so it felt like a weird joke to make.
Absolutely.
But Yeah, okay, all right. That's just, I'm sorry to get derailed in the summary, but it's just crazy that it's in
No,
there.
that's perfectly legit.
Like, is this like that Berenstein Bears thing where like somebody wrote this and assumed it must have happened, or like, I guess what's going on? I have to watch this again now to find out if it's in there?
I might have to double back on that too, just for that last bit.
Okay, so in episode,
But what about you? What about episode 4
yeah, so
of
episode
Gundam
4
Wing?
of Gundam Wing, the Victoria Nightmare, which, so Bob, you went into your Japanese title. The Japanese title here is Akumu no Bikutoria. So Aku, I believe that's the Japanese word for evil or something like that. Is that correct?
So Aku does effectively translate to evil. So if can you say the first word again? Akuma?
Akumu.
Akumu. Okay, if it was Akuma, then it would be something in the effect of a devil. Akumu, I can't quite say what the direct translation is, but I would say that something like event, so evil event. So nightmare would be a pretty decent way to translate that.
Yeah, especially since I think in English too, it's not meant to be a literal nightmare. It's just sort of like kind of this speak that we have for these tragedy events, correct? And then this no, I think, if I remember correctly, is like this kind of possessive kind of particle.
Yes.
I mean, I think nightmare is sort of a good kind of poetic flair to it, and I like that. It's interesting to note that they sort of use the possessive in the Japanese, and in the English we do like a hendiasis here, and we assume it's kind of like one. We insert a hyphen in there in our minds, like it's one kind of globbed event. Victoria Nightmare. It's Victoria. It's the nightmare at the Victoria thing. So it's interesting. But both languages have these kind of approaches to shorthands. All right, we've gotten way too off topic here. So in episode 4, Zex arrives at the Lake Victoria Alliance base to meet with an old friend, Lucretia Noin. But the base falls under attack from Chang Wufei, pilot of the Shenlong Gundam. Troa and Catra part ways after a brief respite from battle, while Hero repairs his Gundam by stealing parts from duos and later uses it for a mission to destroy an Oz transportation carrier. So that's an interesting summary, too, because we don't know that they part ways, Troa and Catra. We just see them sort of jamming out.
I would not have known that had you not said something.
So there's a lot of... Both of these summaries seem to have, implications going on to set us up for the next episode. So somebody maybe has written all these at once. Or didn't want to write about a musical interlude because nothing happens except for a little character growth there.
Certainly. I was just going to say maybe the person who's transcripting these is also adding in whatever the eye catch is or the beginning of the next episode to finish off the concept of the episode.
All right, so Bob, let's go into our story beats section. What is going on here in episode 4? You had promised some crumbs. We do get some crumbs of Domon's background, but what other things of notes here kind of happened story-wise that stuck out to you?
Well, to me, once again, this definitely appears to be something where we're seeing the setup of another character that seems to have a likely recurring role. George Descend shows your traditional knightly heir, but rather than going for your traditional English knight, they go with a French knight. Which I'm glad they did, because going English must be knight can be very tiresome. And to have your young princess who thinks she can outsmart the person she admires trope was very interesting, and it was a nice little respite from the traditional, let's just build up this tension between Neo Japan's Gundam fighter and other person. I also like seeing how Domon is showing his eagerness to just get things done. He does not want to deal with the bureaucracy of the Gundam fighting if it means that he can just fight a strong fighter and get his answer. We never, in the episode, find out who that Scorpio Gundam user is, and I'm sure it's in some sort of a side note thing somewhere.
I know, I feel so bad for that guy. He never... Because he seems to have cool Scorpion powers, but he doesn't get a name. He never gets to use them. He even comes with other nameless friends, and they just get trounced all the time. Do we even know what country they're from?
Well, that's what I'm saying. What I might do while we're chatting about the story beats is try to pull that up. But yeah, so what's interesting to me during all this too is the idea that we're seeing Rain and Domon's relationship develop further too, due to one of my favorite parts is at the very end where Rain wistfully asks, would you save me if I were kidnapped? And Domon's like, only if you were a princess. All right, we're off to Neo Russia. And he just like goes off. It just complete non sequitur. Not going to answer that. Bye.
Yeah,
But
go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, a crumb for something I'm going to talk about after story beats. I guess they're traveling on foot the entire time. Like all the fighters travel on foot. I'll explain that later. But yeah, I just thought it was a fascinating concept to incorporate into the story.
The traveling on foot?
Yeah, the traveling on foot.
Why is it fascinating? I think it sort of hurts the show if that's the way they do it. Like this if they're traveling on foot, this shows
foot as opposed to sorry.
Yeah, if they travel on foot, these 4 episodes must take place over months. Like how long does this if they're doing this Gundam battle every 4 years, why is it literally a 4-year chunk of time the whole Gundam battle takes place, and by the time one is done, the ruling party of the previous one is over? Is that how it works?
No, it is not. What I was going to say to that was, I believe what's happening here is, there we go. I believe that is just a way to say they're not doing military base related things. So it's not as in Gundam Wing where they can have their Gundam towed on a freighter or to use them as a means of transportation. I think that's just the mobile suit is only ever used in fights. Otherwise, it travels separately from them, and then they just go back to it once they reach the destination they're aiming for.
But they have to bring the Gundam with them, don't they?
So there, you will see that there are controls and other things that allow for the Gundam to be transported remotely, and I think we're supposed to just accept that it comes separately.
Yeah, they have to get to America to China somehow. You can't walk there, so there's a boat happening there, right?
I have an answer for you, by the way.
Okay, I'm ready.
I definitely thought that this was Neo Cuba's Gundam, the Arachno Gundam.
Oh, okay.
And it is piloted by Frank Gastro.
I love that the Gundam has the Fidel Castro hat built in to the machine. Like they're like, what do we know about Cuba? I don't know. Cigars? No, we can't make it look like that. All right, just give it a hat. Are there scorpions on Cuba?
It's not scorpions, apparently.
What is it?
Because it mentions that this mobile fighter relies on overwhelming strength to win its battles and is also equipped with 6 tarantula claws, which extend from its back to help it grapple agile opponents.
All right, so arachnid legs. We weren't that far off.
Oh, interesting. I just saw some stuff that comes up later. But yeah, apparently they're referred to as tarantula claws on the thing.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's because there was an association that if you went to Cuba, you would find in the more foresty regions, you would find those big-ass spiders that would climb on fruit or what have you on their crops. And that was a big thing in the 90s, especially when you had films like Arachnophobia kicking around.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad. We've learned so much about Cuba this episode and their affinity for spiders.
Well, not only that, but noticing that Frank Gastro clearly has the Fidel Castro beard and assumed visage.
I kind of love that it's Cuba. Bad. Like I love it. I love that character a lot more now. That I know this. All right. Yes. Here's what I also liked in the Japanese episode is they're really going hard on the Neo prefix, and so money for Neo France, obviously Neo Francs. You have to know that we wanted to update our money, as we escaped sort of an old capitalist type of structure, but we just sort of gave it pretty much the same name. We didn't find a global economy. And so I want to see Neo on more things. Like I want the future centuries reboot of The Matrix to star Neo. I think would be very exciting for them to do. Yeah.
Oh, right. I hate it. I hate it so much.
And then Domon sort of pops up, intervenes in this fight, being a dick, sort of a dick to Rain. I feel really bad for her. And I'm glad she got out of there. And then, the one thing that sort of threw me off in the episode was when they're having their Gundam battle, and then Rain is rescuing the princess, and they're half a mile apart at least. But they both hear, I get why they can hear what's going on in the Gundams, but it's interesting that the Gundams can hear this quiet conversation over there. Is that a plot point that comes up? Like, is this sort of a technological thing that they explain? I only ask because other Gundams actually work hard to explain these things. So I just wanted to know if this was just a way to kind of help this scene move along, or if there's like an actual technological premise here.
I will admit, I zoned only because I was trying to pull up something about a separate Neo France Gundam.
Okay.
While we were talking. But you were asking about what, the rose bits?
The rose bits I'm perfectly fine with. It's interesting that this show has them, considering I don't believe, if I remember correctly, they have sort of new types that are sort of the ones who are able to pilot bits. I like seeing bits. I'm always a fan of bits. They're kind of cool. I'm asking about when, Rain is rescuing the princess, but their conversation is heard by the Gundam pilots. Is there a technological premise for it? Because other Gundams have worked really hard to explain how people can communicate in and out of Gundams to Gundams. So I just wanted to know if this sort of comes up more as like a plot thing, or if this was just a way to kind of move that scene along.
I would say it's more the latter.
Okay.
I'll talk about it in our The Way We Go section in a bit, but this is definitely a matter of trying to make just the character discussion be more easily done. You could BS your way into it by saying, oh, well, with a Gundam that size, obviously they added some sort of oral listening device that can translate directly to the Gundam fighters as they go. But unless they say something like, oh, he was honing in on hearing how she was doing, I don't know.
I don't know. Like, if they were right next to them, it wouldn't have bothered me that much. It was just they were so
but
far away.
They were like 4 blocks away.
Yeah, and I'm like, how specific does that Mike have to be to only pick up those two and not be overwhelmed by chatter from everywhere else? I don't know. The character, the George character, I'm kind of okay with. He reminds me, I like that the Japanese like these, I don't know, like in the mid-90s, they like these characters with roses, because it makes me think of the guy from Yu Yu Hakusho, whose name I don't remember, who had like a rose.
Kurama.
Whip. Yeah, and I like that character as well. So like, what do you think was going on in the 90s there, where this was like a thing that people were exploring?
Well, I can say that obviously across the world, including in America, we like to think of French aristocracy as being very high-end, very beauty-oriented, and that the masculine visual can be presented in a more not feminine, not effeminate, but definitely more what we would call Bishonen, which was a big push during at least the 90s, having pretty boys, pretty men. It was a good way to capture audiences of not just young girls, but also mothers who were just graduating from being young girls, but still a very viable market during a capitalist bubble that was still growing just before the burst. Besides that, a very popular anime from back in the 70s, The Rose of Versailles, was always popular and continues to be popular to this day. So between things like that, Tuxedo Common over in Sailor Moon is constantly throwing roses. Even James, who we call James here in the States, from Pokemon, is regularly seen carrying roses because he is a Bishonen, a pretty boy.
That's interesting, especially since Gundam Wing is sort of another show that sort of deals with pretty boys. It seems to be a very popular thing at the time, I guess.
Yes. Not just at the time. I mean, look around now, too.
Yeah, I guess that wasn't the implication that we don't do it anymore. But like, is this sort of like the beginning of this kind of thing, or had the seeds been planted earlier on?
I would say it was becoming more popular during the 90s because you did see it. I will have to do a slight segue here.
Mm-hmm.
In the mid 80s, we started seeing idol groups becoming a big deal thing, but they were mostly female groups, and they continue to be a very popular thing in Japan. It's a very strong market, but having male idols doesn't necessarily mean they have to be in the huge 20, 30, 40, 50 people groups that can sometimes happen. They can be just 5 guys, your boy band archetype. And it was very common to take these male idols and insert them into anime, not only for their pretty voices and to associate to them when they're on stage, but also to be able to sell CDs, because you could have them sing their character insert songs, and now you're getting a 2-for-1. It's like if you had Justin Timberlake doing songs based off of his characters that he's played at least 2 or 3 of on The Simpsons. Yeah, it's him, the actor, but it's also him, the character. And if you liked his character, were he to be a recurring one, you could then have that as an object for 2 different things. You got a 2-for-1.
Yeah,
you had that out of
sense.
Vice-Kreutz. You had that out of Hanayori Dango. You have it out of a lot of things.
Yeah, it's part of this synergy thing that was being embraced coming out of the 80s. So I buy that. Okay. So
I'll even note, my wife pointed this out to me.
Okay.
The voice actor for Domon Kashu over in Japan is also the voice actor for one of the guys in Vice-Kreutz. And that was composed of a bunch of male idol types. So pretty boys everywhere.
There you go. Meanwhile, in the Gundam Wing episode, we actually have a very interesting plot structure where we've been following. We in theory, the show has, for the first 3 episodes, wanted us to root for these Gundam pilots and sort of their desire to overthrow Oz and the Alliance. But then we spend our time sort of hanging out with Oz soldiers and seeing them train and rise through the ranks and meet Lucretia Noin and kind of figure out what she wants out of life and what motivates her. And we see her and Zex have this tender moment. And Wu Fei actually comes in as the villain of the episode. It's a very interesting structure, and one that's sort of very important to the theme of Gundam Wing, where it doesn't really want, for most of it, it doesn't really want you to be like, this side is righteous, this side is not, we must fight them because we are on the side of good. And it wants to sort of dispel some of those myths and what sort of breeds a conflict and how conflict comes up. So I actually like that it took this approach to this episode, and I've watched this series so many times, and it never really sort of dawned on me until this time that that's sort of what the structure is actually doing. And so I like that they kind of went that way with it. And then you get a little bit at the end with Hero and Duo, since, Hero is sort of our main character, at least market-wise. I still think it's Relina. So, you see a little bit of them. You do get to see a little Relina as well, a little bit of Troa and Catra, just so you can keep up with everybody else, but nothing too much of note there. So that was sort of my, that was my takeaway from the episode's plot structure. Bob, how did you feel meeting these characters?
Well, it's interesting because you brought up a lot of things that I would have stated. I definitely admired Noin. I thought that she was maybe a little too self-assured, considering everything else that was going on with the other locations that were being attacked at the time. But considering that she was the number 2 in the same class as Zex, and the fact that Zex even admits that she intended to be number 2, that she could have easily surpassed him, but wanted to put him up on the platter, was interesting. It already sets up this whole her respecting and possibly having a romantic inclination towards Zex, especially with the sword touching. Touch wieners.
Yeah, a very awkward moment. And it always sort of feels weird that they went that way. I admire the attempt at doing something without words, at implying what's going on between them and maybe the activities they engage in that night. But I wish they sort of done it a little differently. And in the manga, they actually cut that little bit out entirely.
Well, I will say to that too. Sorry.
But what's interesting is, I guess I'll let you finish in a moment. I just wanted to add that you could have began the series here, and now the way we view the sides is extremely different, and the way we view who our protagonists are is completely changed. But it would still work. You have a character, Noin, who's sort of set in a routine in an ordinary world and ready to go, and then boom, something happens and has to draw her into her own story arc. All right, Bob, keep going.
Okay. Yeah. What I was going to state though was that it's interesting that they did what is a common trope in a lot of these styles of anime, whether it's a war based or something that's supposed to have a heavier tone. You will have people speaking in a bar, but it tends to be more like a speakeasy, smoky noir esque bar setting. But they acknowledge that so many of the soldiers are so young, and this is what they were into, that they have all these flashing lights that can be very distracting. And yet, juxtaposing that to the tone of what was occurring then really brought both an emphasis and a discordant vibe as to how these two interact versus what they're supposed to be acknowledging as, part of a rec room.
Yes, I love this sort of debate about why people should fight and what soldiers should be groomed for and how battles should be treated in the middle of this sort of like karaoke kind of bar with these neon lights going everywhere and these the anime equivalent of like a lens flare going on. Very sort of unique directing that could have been done a lot more lazily. And they do keep it in that room in the manga, but the colors obviously don't show in black and white as nicely. So, yeah, it's a good point to bring up there. And there is sort of, Gundam, after leaving the Universal Century and even sort of in its last few series, we've a little bit left behind kind of realistic robo that made the original show so popular. But there are still occasionally attention to details. And so I like when they have to transport the Talgis, they have to take the face mask off of it because the Roman gladiator, the Roman soldier thing on the top of his head you couldn't lay it down flat because of it, so you have to take it off, you have to store it separately. And that could have been overlooked too, but they're like, no, we want to do it, and then they have to rebuild it still. So that was sort of a nice moment there as well.
Yes.
Just a little side note, there's a moment when Hiro and Duo were in Duo sort of muttering to himself after Hiro wants him to leave him alone. And he's saying like, oh, who's this guy think he is? Evil Knievel or something? What is the reference in Japanese? Because would they care who Evil Knievel is?
They say Evil Knievel in the sub that I'm reading, but they misspell evil. Instead of EVAL, it's EVIL.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, I wonder what maybe he was that big and he was just known over there. That's sort of interesting.
Yeah. Well known enough. I mean, that is the ultimate stunt man, so...
So I just want to bring up sort of some things the manga did differently here, because one I agree with and one I do not. Generally, the manga I think has done a good job of rewriting a lot of the weird things about it. We have this weird scene with Treize where he's in a bath at what appears to be the Greek Parthenon. How a bath got there and why he's particularly bathing there makes absolutely no sense. But in the manga, they have him in his office. Hiro has just shot down that plane, but in this show where it's actually carrying space mobile suits, in that one it's carrying Gundanium alloy that Treize wanted to work on something that we'll find out what he's doing later in the series. But Hiro shoots it down now so he can have the excess supplies to repair his Gundam. And so now Lady Un calls him. He's like, "Hey, listen, the woman that was at the baths is now calling him on the phone. The video phone is like, listen, that plane got shut down." And Treize says, "Oh, that's terrible. Who were the names of the pilots?" And then that's sort of where that scene ends there. So I think that sort of makes a lot more sense and fits in with the Treize that we sort of have seen in the previous episode and we'll get to see later on, more than this random thing that never comes up again and makes no sense. The one thing I think that hurt it that didn't do as well is it spent a lot more time with Wu Fei at the beginning of these chapters and seeing a lot of his backstory that never really makes it into the show or the movie. And sort of like why he's going to this thing and what sort of affects his interaction with Noin and what he's actually searching for, rather than having him be this mysterious character that sets off as a villain. I think, and you spend much less time with Noin. I think you hurt the overall theme of Gundam Wing by kind of putting Wu Fei into that protagonist role in this particular episode. So those are
Yeah.
just sort of some thoughts I had.
Oh no,
there.
I absolutely agree because it's interesting. I said it straight to my wife as we were watching. It's awful how I don't even get the character's name really during the course of the episode. So without you saying it's Wu
Yeah.
Fei,
Mm-hmm.
or without my wife saying it aloud while we were watching, I wouldn't have known who the kid was from anybody else as far as a name is concerned. But
Yes.
he is seemingly a chauvinist and just says, I won't fight anybody who is a weak combatant or a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And you are completely inferior because you did not recognize me as capable when you saw me. And that's your weakness as a woman. So on and so on. And it builds this contempt for the character
Yes.
that makes you want to acknowledge Zex as much as you absolutely acknowledge Noin during the course of the episode. It starts shifting your perspective on, oh, we're supposed to like these kids. Oh, why do we like these kids?
Yeah, I think it says something that in the show they wanted us to not like him at this point. Where in the manga they were so afraid we wouldn't like him that they had to, I mean, the backstory was already sort of pre-planned and in a manga that came out the time the show did. So it's not like they invented this stuff to get us to like him. There was a plan for why he acts this way to Noin. But they really wanted us to know it immediately. It's the most backstory of any pilot we've gotten so far in the manga. And so, and they came out 10 years or maybe about 15 years apart. So do you think that there is this trend now, Bob, in sort of a more traditional kind of narrative with forcing us to like these protagonists despite us being in a post-Sopranos, post-Breaking Bad kind of age?
I think that at least as far as anime is concerned, because I've only seen so many recent shows, they do a good job at letting characters build up a story and then turning it on its head. They want to play with your expectations as opposed to you're getting to build up your like of a character like a Walter White or who have you, even though they're doing awful things. I mean, just even within the show, we see this character who is constantly pushing away someone who's trying to become a friend. I'm referring to Hero versus Duo trying to create this friendship. And then just, at least in this episode, removing parts from this person's thing, from his Gundam, to activate his own Gundam, rather than just accepting the assistance that he was trying to offer, further pushing him away from having any kind of human connection. And whether or not that gets acknowledged later on, which I'm sure it will, it really does paint a picture of who this hero character is. Someone who does not act as a human, even though Juo even says, well, apparently you're beyond me. You're some kind of a, you're not human. You have to be above that. Why would you pretend you're human?
Yeah, and for me personally, I've been less interested in people being likable because generally I've often found those characters sort of boring. I'm more interested in characters being interesting, whether I like them or not. If there's something interesting, there's a hook there, I can sort of go for it. It's my problem with Hero, the first 3 episodes, there's nothing sort of interesting going on yet. But fortunately, early on in my screenwriting studies, finally, after being crazy and being like, I don't think you need to be likable, I don't think you need to be likable, you just... a professor finally came and said, you know what? Don't worry about making your characters likable. That's this weird fallacy thing that's going on. We really just need to feel something for them. And for me, that happens to be interest. But he generally sort of showed us an example of a movie I can no longer remember the title for, about, I think it was Paul Newman, starring this character. And the character sort of is a detective and he's going about his day and he's setting his morning coffee. He goes to drink it. And then he has like this awful reaction because he sort of grounded it wrong or didn't take the grounds out. And so they were in there in the coffee floating around. And that moment we kind of get a chuckle and he says, this is the moment when you begin to empathize with him. And some of you, it might be because you kind of pity him. Some of you might be because he made you laugh accidentally. Some of you, it's because there was a moment of weakness here in a character that's otherwise going to be your standard detective, that he has this very blatant, head-scratching moment of stupidity. And so I think there's sort of a nice moment. I think when Hiro leaves and we find out that he stole the parts, that's a moment that gives me a laugh, and it kind of, it doesn't give the morality of Hiro any weight to it per se. It's still not a good thing that he did, but it's an amusing thing that he did. And so there's an interesting context for me to kind of reevaluate now my feelings towards him, who so far has been otherwise uninteresting.
Certainly.
And so that is my thought on that, I suppose. I would also like to know what the setup was that led Catra to randomly be playing the violin for Trowa or in spite of Trowa. Like, it's just sort of a weird set. I'm just trying to imagine, like what were the beats that happened before this if the actor came to me and was like, why am I playing the violin to him? Like, does he want me to? Am I just doing this and he walked in? Like, what happened here? And I don't know what that scene would look like in my mind.
To me,
yeah,
just from my perspective, it was a matter of communication without words.
Mm-hmm.
It was one, trying to exemplify that this is peaceful, but also possibly competitive. It was trying to explain a very complex emotion that allowed them to then communicate through a language that they shared that did not require them to be in their Gundams. It allowed for us to see that these two care about each other in some way or another. And I said outright to my my wife, this is either a bromance or a romance, and I really don't care which.
Yeah. It's certainly helpful.
It creates that closeness. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I thought you were done. It certainly helps get to see a different side of Trowa that we're used to being sort of just as much of a soldier-ish in that soldier mindset as Hiro. That he can kind of chill out and relax a little bit every now and then, and it does set up some things for them later on as well. So, very cool little quick way to get through it. Again, like with the sword, with the fencing swords kind of banging up against each other, it feels a little awkward, but I don't mind the attempt as well. So going back to sort of my interesting versus likable characters, and this was sort of what I was avoiding saying to you in the pre-show, Bob, is over the course of, you would mention sort of Hero Duo being the one you align yourself more than Hero. It makes sense for this point of the episode. For me, I've been watching the show since 2002, 2001. Watched it maybe 8 to 10 times. I think over those course of all those times watching it, my favorite pilot by which I mean the most interesting pilot to me, has changed each time over the course. I've gone through each one, and my current one happens to be Wu Fei that we meet predominantly in this episode. And so, I kind of like that they introduce him this way. I think it's sort of a very bold thing to do with one of your main characters, and a very smart thing for the overall tone of your show. So I'm glad they took that risk. And it's probably something I'll steal somewhere down the line, I'm sure.
Certainly.
Yes.
And that's very possible. I think the reason why I am taking to Duo so far is that he has given me the least reason to dislike him, because he seems like a standard operative for these styles of shows. He is not necessarily a 100% good guy, but he is definitely a person who is amicable and is trying to believe in whatever his mission is. He acknowledges that there are many similarities between the two, but he is enough of a dumb hero, which I find myself liking more often. People that don't connect the dots until it's just about too late.
Yeah, Duo was my first favorite pilot way back when. When I watched it in middle school and then watched it again in high school, he was sort of my favorite there. So... I can see why. I get why you like it. He's a very likable character. I like them all still. It's just sort of which one is sort of re-ranked my favorites. So, yeah. And there have been times when there have been pilots, early on, and actually early on, it's sort of become, there were pilots I didn't like, but I've grown to sort of like them all now. So, like Wu Fei used to be a pilot I didn't like, I didn't get, but the older I got and the more I watched it, the more it started to kind of all fit together and make sense. And that's how he's ended up here now. So, so now I think we've sort of dug through these very well. Let's go off to the way we go. So this week, what I thought of as I was watching these episodes, listening to their soundtrack, is they really love the 90s jazz music in both these series. Is this a sort of a common trend that was going on in the 90s in Japan? What was sort of this resurgence of jazz that is happening here?
Well, when you're saying this, my presumption is that you're associating this with Cowboy Bebop, yeah?
Well, so I mean, I guess that's sort of where it kind of climaxes, at a zenith. But do you get Cowboy Bebop if these shows aren't here, or are these shows a product of the thing that makes Cowboy Bebop?
I would say the latter, only because it is a common thing in Japan to have the cool guy trope to really lean into this hard-boiled vibe.
Yeah.
The idea of having someone who is cool in terms of their mentality, but is very fiery in heart, being able to be a man's man, having that deep, gravelly personality, if not through their throat, drinking scotch on the rocks and just looking up after a hard day and trying to decide, is this the day that I can look back on and say I did a good job? That is the mentality that you see projected on what makes a man after the westernization starts finding its way into Japan post World War II. And to have that be exemplified easily, to have a shorthand for that, you often have men in suits, men who live by some sort of a code of honor, men who are, and I keep saying men because it is often associated with men, but these men who are in smoky bars, who drink responsibly but deeply, and they listen to jazz. Jazz is a very strong music genre in Japan, matter of fact. And they have at least one of the high premier bars, jazz bars in Japan, I think just outside of Tokyo, if not in one of the major areas. It's a whole thing. Jazz is big in Japan.
Ah, so fascinating. So was it already big by the early 90s, or?
Oh, well before. I'm talking like even in the 60s and going forward. And a lot of the major jazz musicians found their way in and out of, I have to look it up. I'll try to get you information before we part today so you can put it in the show notes. But there are a number of well-known jazz establishments, but there's one specific one where some of the greats like Coltrane and so on and so forth used to go and learn and share what they have learned and share with this one huge Japanese fan who had run this establishment for many, 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 many years.
Well, I guess,
and I would say that,
Go on.
I was just going to say, I would say that jazz is up there for your hard-boiled archetype with enka, if you know the genre from Japanese.
Yes. So I guess I just find it curious because Gundam in the 70s, 80s, are there a very standard kind of John Williams-esque sort of score, or sort of morphs into like this weird electronic synthesized, but occasionally Pink Floyd kind of rock in their scores. And then you have these two shows and Gundam After War X sort of delving more into the 90s before Yoko Kanno in 99 with Turn A Gundam does something completely different from everything before it. So I'm just wondering, like, if these three shows are kind of leaning into jazz, was there a resurgence of jazz? Or like, where do you think this sort of came from? Was this a trend in anime in general, or just something that the guys at Bandai wanted to explore at this time?
I think it was something that was widespread at the time. I can tell you that in the 90s, 1991, I think was the year, there was Chojin Sentai Jetman. Again, I'm going into my Super Sentai background because I'm a big Tokusatsu fan. I'm
Makes
the
sense,
G Gundam guy here.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a well-known character, Black Condor. Black Condor, spoiler for anyone who gives a damn about what I'm about to say. Okay, we're good.
I'll put the spoiler alarm on. It'll be fine.
A big spoiler is at the very end of that series, Black Condor dies. He dies on a bench, giving his best wishes to his rival, the Red, I want to say it was Red Hawk. It might have been Red Falcon. They have a lot of Reds that have either Hawk or Falcon involved. And Pink Swan. Those two get married. He sits on a bench just outside of the church, having suffered some sort of a major wound, and dies. prior to that, he was a hard-boiled individual. He was a person who would frequent a jazz club, who would drink in a smoky bar. But that continues through even if you look at things like Lupin the Third. That was a very jazz-heavy series with a hard-boiled individual, among the cast, so on and so forth. The archetype is common enough in Japan, and it's shown a resurgence at the very least, if not a whole new wave of itself in the early 90s. And seeing as this series goes through 95 and 96, not a bad place to assume that it's continuing through, obviously, to 99 or 2000 when we get our culmination in Cowboy Bebop.
Okay, very succinct. That sounds, hope that information is helpful to the audience as it was for me. I think that's kind of a cool sort of trend in music and sort of jazz in other countries, which is sort of an interesting thing that it ended up being so successful other places besides here in America. So, Bob, you have yourself a very interesting The Way We Go this week. Why don't you dive right in?
All right. Well, so I'm currently watching Mobile Fighter G Gundam on a series of DVDs that I had purchased some years ago. This is the first time that I went through the extras where I found a section called The G Files. It's an awful name, but it's very, very apparent that it's of its time.
Yes.
But this first G file is speaking with the director Yasuhiro Imagawa, who I had the pleasure of meeting back in, I want to say, 2008. I want to say it was 2008. I got him to sign my glove. If I can find the glove, I will show it off at some point. But I had him autograph it, and he dubbed me the King of Heart because I was cosplaying Domonkashi very poorly, such as it was back in the aughts. But he talks about, in the very first question, explain how G Gundam relates to conventional Gundam series. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but he effectively says that G Gundam is not a Gundam series at all, but its own G Gundam series. It's a title totally independent from the Gundam tradition. As a mobile fighter series, it should have been clearly distinct from the original Gundam scenario, since these Gundams in the story are striking their poses as mobile fighters, not as war machines. As he goes on to continue about the similarities in their setting, he says that G Gundam, like the SD Gundam series as OVAs, was a TV series in its own right that was its own singular entity. So that should answer your question that you asked. I think from the very first episode here, why is G Gundam the way it is? Why does it stray so far from the Gundam formula? And it's because they wanted to shake off what he calls the spell of the association to the Gundam franchise, or to anime in general.
Yeah, it's good to have it confirmed. It was sort of always kind of a theory of mine that they wanted to take a distance themselves, and I think it is smart to look at it as sort of not a mobile suit entry into the Gundam metaverse. And I think him bringing up the SD Gundam stuff is sort of a smart analogy to make, because that does help kind of quantify things a lot differently, despite them looking like the way we expect Gundams to look, where it could be easy to confuse it with a mobile suit show in the metaverse. So good find there, Bob. I hope these other DVDs have some extras as well.
I have another part that I would like to share with you specifically, Skeyhill, because... Sorry?
I like it. Let's do it.
All right, cool. I'm going to skip over how they transport their mobile fighters and why Neo Japan's transportation capsule is flower-shaped. They're interesting, but we can save that for another time.
Sure.
But the question that I think he answers here, you would appreciate the most, was it challenging to depict all those country settings in the show's first half?
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how where with other series or with films, you would be able to go on location. You can't do that with a budget that they had for this series.
Yeah.
So rather than just use travel books, he looked to film. He tried to find films that had very specific imagery and used that to dictate the backgrounds and the settings that he used.
Yeah.
So with the image of Rome for episode 1, he wanted to use Fellini's Rome, but he had not watched it at the time, so he was actually watching Ginger and Fred, also by Fellini. He also liked to watch Powers of Evil in Fellini's Histoires Extraordinaire. And it is a horror film, but Rome is a city of history, and suggested that Rome is a city of ghosts. So to treat that episode as a Gundam, a giant robot, is going to fight in a town of ghosts. That's why Rome is depicted as bleakly as it is. But it is also a good way to set the tone for what Earth has become as we start the series.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem.
He talks about how his image of America or New York, he talked to his group and they decided that the Brooklyn Bridge was probably the best representation of it. So he decided on Woody Allen's Manhattan. He brought a video cover of this film to the studio and he said, "Isn't this good? Here, Domo will collapse, all right?" But then he talks about how, at least in terms of mise-en-scène, that was the feel he was going for. But he instead decided that the peak would be from the Genesis CD titled "The Lamb Lies on Broadway." And based on a very specific lyric, that's why we have the misty morning atmosphere on Broadway being the setting for the Gundam fight between the Shining Gundam and the Gundam Maxter.
Okay.
Also, the hotel room was based very heavily on Hitchcock's Rear Window and Vertigo. Yeah, specific imagery: the stairs leading into the room, the neon lighting just outside, the very square room. He wanted those images to make sure that it felt more American and less possibly Japanese. Episode 3's China was supposed to be based fairly off of the Wan Fei Fan series that never got translated from Hong Kong to a direct Japanese, but he was a big fan of the Wan Fei Fan series here. And tried to incorporate a lot of traditional Chinese landscape, as well as focusing on smaller set pieces in these villages to try and create that sense of not just big city life. And then finally, for episode 4, the one that we just watched for France, French cinema was fairly difficult to transfer to anime, so he used the images in Swing Out Sisters' early video clips with the concept of that the two walk around in the city of Paris. And that gave a lot of good references for things like hand railings and neatly aligned staircases. Even the tree that Maria Louise was tied to was supposed to be near this concept of a terrace on a hill restaurant setup. But he also wanted to get the atmosphere of Aoyama Avenue in Japan. Well, I thought you would appreciate the fact that the imagery that we've seen so far has been based off of film.
Yeah, I wish you had picked sort of better, less, stereotypical kind of films. But it makes sense why he would, especially if you're trying to go for an international audience. You want to make sure the references fit for all the cultures. So I buy that. I buy all that. Makes sense.
Well, also the shorthanding of everything. Like, if you had to whittle everything down, if you had to funnel it into a pure distilled essence of when I hear the word Rome, when I hear the word France, what is the instant thing that I think about?
Yeah.
It's fair to believe that you're going to think, yeah, there's a tourist attraction version of Rome, but it's not quite the same, and it doesn't really set up everything that we're going to see later in terms of the ecological standpoint. So make the dirty, misanthropic city of Rome as opposed to the brilliant spectacle of Rome. And he got in trouble, apparently, after having the first episode air for his depiction of Rome.
Well, there's also an interesting thing because he sort of does. I mean, he does try to find a new thing with the French hand railings and things like that in the restaurants, like under a certain street level. But he also then makes the touristy parts very integral to the plot of each episode, where the kidnapping happens at the Colosseum and the enemy base is in the Great Wall of China, and the Eiffel Tower becomes this whole climax of the episode in its weird droopy form. So he couldn't quite get fully away from it.
So that's funny, though, because this, I'm going to bring out one of those things about the mobile suits and how they got transported. They just went with the "is it fun? Okay, do it" concept of what other giant robo series would do in years past. So if they thought it was a good idea to have a Gundam burst out of the Statue of Liberty, yeah, you could worry about the technical aspects.
He does that. That's right. Oh my god.
But instead of worrying about it, what is a good image? Because this is a series focused towards kids as opposed to a wider audience that you might have with a Mobile Suit series.
Very true.
This is a giant robo before it's a Gundam. You know what I mean?
Yes, it doesn't want to be in the realistic robo, and it certainly is fine that it doesn't, because it never, at least at the moment, doesn't promise it. But it was nice to see him and Rain in like a hangar bay and be like, oh, of course they would have a base of some sort and have to do repairs and have to set up shop. Like, I liked that moment that we got to spend there, as it helped them be less like cartoon characters, despite him having earlier popped out of the Scene River to interrupt the Gundam fight. All right, so great interviews you found. I hope you'll find more as we go along the way. It's sort of very elucidating, and happy to hear them. So now, Bob,
yes.
I'm getting a little tired from all this walking around we've been doing. Let's go find a seat on a bench in the nerd corner. All right. So, Bob, this week, here's the nerdy thing I happened to stumble upon somewhat accidentally. It's not really a great entry into the nerd corner because I don't know too much about it. I just saw it yesterday, and it sort of has captured my imagination. They have made this year, they have made a board game of the movie The Shining. And I don't know how you would play it, why you would play it, what the goal would be, but it's so bizarre that this thing exists. I might get it just to figure out what is going on.
Knowing absolutely nothing.
Yes.
My presumption is it's going to be very much like something as Fury of Dracula or something of its nature, where it's going to be a asymmetrical game where you probably have to play one side as Jack and his debilitating sanity, and the ability to disperse some of these horrors, versus playing as any of the other three good characters out of the mother, the child, and Scruthers. The gentleman who
Scatman Crothers. Yeah.
So between those three, those are probably your characters that get played, and they might throw in a fourth one somewhere that's supposed to be a good character somehow. But a lopsided asymmetrical style of gameplay has been very common for use, and it does create a sense of horror because you have one person with a lot of power but is very susceptible to the many that have smaller but synchronized or coalescing powers that help to defeat the final entity. So I've seen people do that. Again, Fury of Dracula and a few others do this. As opposed to just a couple years ago, they came out with one based off of The Thing, where it's a hidden villain game where the players slowly but surely get turned into the villain, but they can't figure it out until people go around and take turns. And so there's a bluffing aspect while you're still trying to sabotage the mission that you might be on.
Yeah, so initially, I'll sound like good guests. Initially, when I saw it, I didn't get it because it felt sort of like an impulse purchase, and I'm not really sort of a board game man anyway, so I don't really want one cluttering my house. And then there was also the thought of like, well, I don't think I'm going to even visit anyone to play a board game with in the next 9 months, so what is the point? But it has been sort of burrowing into my brain more and more that it exists, and I must know more. Maybe I'll find a YouTube video on it, and that will satiate whatever's going on in my mind. But that was sort of,
check out Geek and Sundry. They tend to have this Game the Game series where they will try a game out and they will explain the rules in a brief, succinct manner over the course of 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that might be enough to kind of get this off, but I'll give you an update next episode, Bob and dear listeners. Bob, what sort of fun, nerdy things did you find this week?
I found that my wife is also going to be starting a podcast with two of her friends where they're going to revisit the entire original Sailor Moon series. And because of that, she and I decided that we are going to bring back Saturday morning cartoons in our household, but we are going to refer to them as Saturday morning anime. We will watch her 3 episodes of Sailor Moon that she plans to do for each episode of her podcast, because that series has 200 plus episodes besides movies.
Oh.
So the only way they're going to keep up is if they do it in chunks. Otherwise, they're going to have 4 years, and there's a lot of just expositional or character development episodes. It's not all plot driven.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what they want out of that series compared to Sailor Moon Crystal, which is, very quick, very plot driven because it's directly from the manga, but it doesn't have any real characterization for anybody besides Sailor Moon. So we're going to watch those 3 episodes every Saturday. Follow it up with Gundam Wing, because we're watching all of that on Hulu.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll pop in my DVD of G Gundam and watch the 1 episode of G Gundam and go from there. But that 5 episode setup is a pretty decent Saturday morning, where even if we don't roll out of bed until like 9 or so, that's plenty of time to watch all that, have a decent breakfast, and prep before I come and do this show with you.
Yeah, that's a busy first half of your Saturday if you're chugging along with 5 episodes and then a podcast recording, but good effort.
Yeah, but I mean,
friend.
Don't you remember your childhood of watching Saturday morning cartoons? That was exactly what we did.
Yeah. Well, we didn't record podcasts afterwards, but yeah, from 8 to 12.
Well, we didn't record podcasts, but we hung out with our friends and we're like, dude, did you just see that episode of Yu-Gi-Oh? Yeah, no, I got to build that deck. Like, that's what we did.
Well, I did not. I mostly just watched the TV and then had to wait till Monday to talk with longtime Quixotic cinematographer Alberto about the Digimon we have just watched.
Digimon. So good.
Yes, they are digital monsters, and I believe that Digimon are the champions. Okay.
Yeah, but listen to Butterfly sometime and see how you feel about it.
The Butterfly?
So there is the song that we have here, the very well-known Digimon, Digital Monsters. We don't have the rights for this song, though. There's that.
Yeah.
But the original opening called Butterfly, not the Smile DK song that you might know from Dance Dance Revolution, is a completely different song and has a lot of different story beat setup that makes the series feel more a part of the opening and not just let's get amped by saying the name of the series so that way we know what show we're watching.
Make sure you know what you're doing right now.
Know that Saban owns you for this half hour.
Okay. So, Bob, you got any plugs before we head on out?
They're behind me on the wall here, but I can give you some info about where you can find me. Bad jokes, guys. This is what I do. You can find me at bobscaryvoa.com, where you can absolutely listen to my reels for character, commercial, and narration. You can hire me through there or go to voices.com, find me there. If you want to find me on Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, or any other sites that I might be involved with, just go to linktree, linktr.ee/BobScaryVOA. And by the way, if you're a person who likes coffee like I do, and I do, go to foundfamiliar.com/BobScaryVOA, and you can get yourself 10% off your next coffee purchase by using my promo code VOXHART. That's VOXHART.
All right. Thank you, Bob. And I am Patrick Scale. You can find my shorts, documentaries, animations, features on quixoticunited.com, and presumably there are other social medias by similar names. We would also like to thank our audio technician, Lev Van Rensselaer. He's the audio maven that you all are craving. He's turning those knobs and dials just to make us sound so slickety sweet. And we'd like to thank you, of course, the audience, for listening. All right, Bob, tell the audience what your favorite art style is.
I like hentai. Hentai is art, and you should just accept that I have that on my phone at all times.
Good night.
Just want me, communication.